What's up YouTube? I'm back with another modular synth video, and in a previous video I mentioned something along the lines of a filter is not hugely necessary in a starting rack, and I kind of want to kick myself because after trying this filter I'm pretty much in love, and I want to show you guys what I'm talking about. This is the HexInverter Red Dragon, and the reason this filter is so awesome is because it produces sounds that I haven't heard from a filter in the digital realm, nor much of what I've heard in the analog realm either. Everything about this module is absolutely beautiful, from the simplicity of the layout to just the general sort of stylistic design choices. And I mean, even if you look at the back here, it's got a dragon design on the circuit board. I mean, it's small things, you won't even see that while it's in the synth, but it just goes to show the sort of level of thought that goes into the module before it goes into production and stuff like that. Thank you so much to HexInverter for sending me this module, and to Mother City Modular for making it happen. And on a side note, they're also a supporter of my channel. I mean, if you go back to some of the comments, I'm not sure how many of you guys actually read the comments on my videos, they actually engage with me in my videos and stuff like that. So yeah, shout out to HexInverter. Thanks so much for the module, and let's dive into it. I want to show you guys some cool sounds that I can get out of this guy. So in terms of functionality, one of the sort of key aspects of the Red Dragon is that all of the parameters have CV control as well as attenuverters. So that means you can save on not having to buy extra modules to kind of tone the modulation as it goes into the module. A lot of other filter modules basically would just have like a cutoff input. They would lack like a resonance input, and they would also lack a morph input to be able to change the sort of type of sound that the filter is creating. And not only that, is the CV input would probably only have like an amount control. So you don't have the ability to invert the CV as it's coming in. Say for example, you want to switch an ADSR upside down, or you're wanting to just invert the modulation as it goes in. You're actually saving on having to buy an extra sort of 4 attenuverters or 2 dual attenuverter modules alongside this module. It just has that extra functionality specifically in the modular environment that just makes it such a sort of Swiss Army knife low pass filter. So the other really cool feature is that you've got 2 cutoff CV control inputs. One of them has the attenuverter, and the other one is just straight to the cutoff modulation. So this is cool because most often in patches, specifically with dance music and stuff like that, you would have an envelope controlling the low pass filter, as well as maybe something like a velocity or something like random modulation or something like that. So having them both, again, saves you from having to mult the inputs or mix the inputs using another module. So you're definitely saving on having to buy a whole bunch of extra modules just to be able to get the full functionality of your filter in the modular environment. You also have the input drive, which again saves you from having to, condition the tone of something before going into the filter. Often I like to use a drive before filter because it adds a little bit of grit, specifically if you're using a digital oscillator. So I'll show you a little bit later what I'm talking about. This is cool because you've got drive CV control. So you could add, for example, just a little bit of bite onto the transient of a sound, just to kind of give it a little bit more grit and then tone it down using like an envelope or something like that. So here I've patched a low C into the Red Dragon and then out into the mixer, and I've got this envelope into the cutoff B. So that saves me from then still having this attenuverter cutoff to control using something like velocity, or something like a random CV, like from Marbles, which is also busy triggering it at the moment, or from another envelope to create even more of a sort of unique curve to the sound, like I've explained in one of my Serum tutorials. So I'm going to show you guys what both of those sound like. So that's another really cool thing about having, the different selectable kind of filter curves on a potentiometer, because that allows you to get almost infinite different types of filter sounds from just a low-pass filter, which is another really, really, really cool feature about the Red Dragon. So, like I said, I'm going to plug another envelope into this cutoff over here. And this is going to be a much sharper envelope, so we can create a little bit of a sort of like acidy sort of bite to the sound. So now I've set a random CV input coming out of marbles. And an LFO. I'm sure all you guys know what an LFO sounds like. And then here I've set an envelope to modulate the drive input with just a little bit, and you'll hear that kind of like extra bite that it adds, like I was explaining earlier. And then another absolutely amazing feature of Red Dragon is that it's actually got a built-in internal VCA. This also saves you from getting another VCA to kind of tone the output, so you don't actually have a volume control over the VCA with a knob. You do actually with CV input. So we can set up an envelope to trigger the VCA, unplug it from the drive and plug it in there. And then to switch this down, we get the internal VCA on. So now we can set a bit of a sequence, and let's have a listen. So often with analog filters, specifically when you sort of like key tracking the resonance, or when you're sending modulation to the resonance, it can sometimes bite a little bit too hard. So I'm going to show you an example of that, and it might get a little bit hectic for the speakers, so I'm going to try to turn it down in post, but just be warned. So I've got some random modulation coming out of marbles going into the resonance control, and we're going to play around with the input and the amount over here. So you can hear with some of those triggers, it gets a little bit too much. And so one of the cool things about the Red Dragon is it's got this res clip built in. It's basically an internal clipper on the resonance circuit, so it doesn't allow it to overdrive past a certain point. So this is what it sounds like. It basically tames that sort of bite that the resonance gives, so you get much more of a sort of pleasurable sound, and it kind of sounds more like distortion than it does just boosting a sine wave, you know? So here I made a super simple sort of ambient pad type patch. I was playing around with the morphing of the wavetables within the Waldorf NW1, and I figured it would be perfect to kind of use it alongside the Red Dragon, because this is sort of the perfect module to add that kind of like beefiness to a sort of slightly more lightweight digital oscillator like the Waldorf. A lot of people criticize the Waldorf because it doesn't sound as good as some of the other sort of oscillators on the market. However, that being said, just being able to bolster it with something like the little bit of drive or something from the Red Dragon adds to the beefiness of the synth. So you've got kind of the capabilities of the digital being sort of driven by the power of the analog. I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but to my ear, it just sounds so much better than a lot of the demos that I'd found when I'd started running it through something like a Red Dragon or some other processing within the analog realm. I want to show you guys the patch the sort of pad that I had made and then I'm going to apply some of the Red Dragon filter to that, and you can kind of hear what I'm talking about. So that's before the Red Dragon. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to plug it into the input, and I've already routed the output sort of directly through here. So let's start playing with some random stepped CV on the cutoff, maybe modulate a bit of the resonance as well. But let's just hear straight off the bat what this filter does to that sort of digital oscillator that we had doing that kind of pad sound. And just so you guys can get a reference of like exactly what that's doing to the sound, I'm actually going to play a square oscillator that I've actually loaded up in here. I think this is a square. Let's have a listen. With analog filters, you kind of get the self-oscillating resonance that kind of makes a very beautiful tone. So what you can do is you can actually unplug the input completely, and you're still capable of getting tones out of the filter. So this is what that sounds like. So like you heard, with just a little bit of sort of stock delay and reverb on that, you're able to get these kind of like spooky, atmospheric, melodic, ghosty sort of sounds literally out of nowhere. Is it a ghost in the machine? I don't know, but it sounds pretty cool. And this is actually a trick that I use quite often, even with the SH101 and with the Moog that I've got. Like I said, analog filters have this ability to create a very musical sound with the self-oscillation of the filter. And I think it's these types of sort of non-linearities which add to the kind of linearities of something like a digital oscillator like the Waldorf. I hope that kind of like explained a little bit about what I was trying to say earlier. But yeah. So here I've made a sort of ambient chill out type patch that kind of takes advantage of the Red Dragon having all of these modulation inputs for almost all of the parameters. So I've got the marbles basically controlling the pitch of the chord, so that's what's doing like the sequence and stuff like that, as well as also modulation outputs going into, you know, various of these cutoff, resonance, and also the morph CV input. So I've got the ability to kind of morph the shape of the filter, you know, from a 6 dB to a 24 dB, like I explained. So the make noise woggle bug at the top here, the random CV control, that's basically controlling a couple of parameters within the patch. Some of the filter parameters, it's controlling the spread amount of the marbles. So basically when I turn it up, it creates more of a sequence, as well as starts to modulate more of the parameters that I've kind of created within the patch. So essentially what I've done is I've created a patch with a sort of single macro that gives me the ability to create a bunch of different sort of random variations and sequences out of that. So this is what it sounds like. So in this video, I was kind of concentrating more on showing the functions and the raw sound of the filter. So I didn't make too many samples for my Patreons, but that being said, I'm going to sit now and I'm going to make a couple of sort of acid lead lines using this guy. I'm going to make a couple of effects and I'm going to recreate that pad that I made in the beginning using that Waldorf with the filter modulation as well. Once again, thanks to HexInverter and Mother City Modular for making this happen. Mother City Modular is a Cape Town, South Africa-based synthesizer shop that specializes in Eurorack and modular synths and accessories. They've got all sorts of cases, cables, and everything to suit your Eurorack needs. So head on over to the website. I'm going to post in the description right now if you want to check out more about the HexInverter stuff and more about the Mother City Modular stuff. If you want to know more about my Patreon and what I was talking about the samples and stuff like that, head on over to the link that's somewhere on the screen right now. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.